Are you tired of seeing your skin become clear only for your period to roll around and bring along a bunch of red inflamed pimples with it that take forever to clear? Or facing this constant dread of making plans around your period just in case your skin flares up and makes you feel like you have to flake last minute? That's what used to happen to me too, but I was able to balance my hormones and clear my acne. In this video, I'm giving you 8 steps so that you're able to balance your hormones and clear your acne too, so that you don't feel like you have to continue to reach for the pill. Let me guess, you've been Googling the best way to balance your hormones and clear your skin because you feel like you have hormonal acne, because you've noticed a pattern with your breakouts the week before your period, during your period, or around ovulation, in this cyclical pattern that happens month after month. You notice that like clockwork, every single month that is when the breakouts start for you. You feel like there's this hormonal connection, but you just don't know what's going on or what the heck you're supposed to do about it. And even more annoyingly about these hormonal breakouts is they're quite deep, cystic, and they take a while to heal. And by the time last month's spots have cleared and left the red mark, you're getting new spots in that same place, and it just feels like this consistent cycle. If that sounds familiar, then I've been there too. And I promise that the answer is not to just use hormonal birth control and come back when you want to get pregnant. And it might not be that you just have PCOS, because so many with hormonal breakouts don't actually have PCOS. And there are so many different reasons why hormonal acne can be happening. But in this video, I'm going to be breaking down how I balanced my hormones and cleared my hormonal acne. We're going to start by talking about female hormone patterns and your monthly cycle, so you know exactly what your hormones should be doing month after month. We'll talk about the hormone hierarchy. I'm going to discuss hormone testing and if everyone actually needs a hormone test, and if you do think you'd benefit from one, the right time to actually do a hormone test. I'm going to give you the 8 steps that I took to clear my hormonal acne, and then of course I will be giving you some homework so that you know exactly what to do by the end of this video to start clearing your hormonal acne and balancing your hormones. With this video, you definitely want to pull out a notebook so that you can take notes. Let's start by talking about the female hormone patterns and your monthly cycle. And this is going to be specific to people who aren't on any sort of hormonal contraception that shifts the way that your hormones are going to be, because whenever we use hormonal contraception to change the pattern of our hormones, we are then suppressing our natural hormone patterns and replacing it with synthetic hormones. You aren't going to be having the same natural cycle month after month. And even though with the pill you do get a bleed when you stop taking the pill for about a week, but that's not a true period. That's what's referred to as a breakthrough bleed. Your body has then removed those synthetic hormones, and then there is now this opportunity for the body to bleed and have a period, but it's not a true period because you aren't having natural hormone cycles. And that's something a lot of women don't realize when they are taking hormonal contraception. So for the women who aren't on any hormonal contraception, you are having your natural monthly cycle. This is what the typical pattern should look like in terms of the fluctuations that our body is trying to achieve month after month. Now, I will preface this by saying if you are having hormonal acne, hormonal symptoms, and you feel like your hormones aren't necessarily in the place that they should be, then your hormones obviously won't look within the perfect balance that I'm about to show you within this diagram. But that doesn't mean to say that you can't get to that point and hormones in themselves aren't necessarily the problem. There's always going to be something underneath the surface that's causing the hormones to shift. All about the environment, so it's not just about the hormones misbehaving. This is the diagram in terms of what you will expect from your monthly cycle. A typical female cycle is from 28 to 32 days. Now, a lot of women that I work with as a naturopath and nutritionist have cycles that are either shorter, more irregular, or on the longer side. So if right now you don't necessarily have the perfect cycle length, you don't want to feel bad about yourself. This is just information to have so that you now know that if you aren't having a monthly regular cycle within 28 to 32 days, then there is something potentially going on that we want to look at. From days 0 to 14, roughly, this is the first half of our monthly cycle if we were basing this off a typical 28-day cycle. Day 1 is the first day that you start bleeding, so the first day of your period, and periods typically last from 4 to 7 days for a healthy period length. That is going to be your menstrual phase within the first half of your monthly cycle, which is the follicular phase. Our period, which can be from days 1 to 7, and then after that we would have our follicular phase, which lasts from the start of your period, because the first half including the period is still the follicular phase, but let's say from the end of your period up until you will ovulate around the middle of your monthly cycle. Let's say your follicular phase goes from day 7 up to around day 14, and then you would go into ovulation. And ovulation is typically 1 day of your cycle when the egg is released, but the ovulation period can be around 4 days because we don't know exactly when the egg is going to be released. And then after the ovulation, we then move into our luteal phase, which is going to be roughly from days 14 or day 15, let's say, all the way to day 28. To clarify the 4 phases, we have the first phase, which is your period. We have the follicular phase, which is the first half of your cycle. So the way I like to think of this is follicular and first. Then we have ovulation, which is going to be midway through the cycle. Then we have phase 4, which I like to think of till last. Those are the 4 phases which typically go over a 28-day cycle. So to clarify, menstruation will be roughly days 1 to 7. Then we will have the follicular phase from day 7 to day 14, where we will then have your ovulation. And then after that, we would then move into the luteal phase for the remainder of your menstrual cycle. Now, during the month, you are going to have fluctuations in hormones, and this is absolutely normal. So after your menstruation, hormones are typically on the lower side, and then we'll start to see certain hormones increase. And around the middle of your cycle, around the ovulation time, you will see an increase in estrogen, you'll see an increase in testosterone, and other fertility hormones to be aware of, luteinizing hormone and follicular stimulating hormone, which will also be elevated during the ovulation time, specifically so the body can get pregnant. In the second half of the cycle, progesterone is going to be at its highest, because if a pregnancy was to occur during the ovulation, we need that progesterone to be able to have a healthy pregnancy. So progesterone typically stays high for the second half of the cycle. Now, if a pregnancy hasn't occurred, then the progesterone will drop around your period when your period begins. Now, during the second half of your cycle, we are obviously going to have other hormones there, so estrogen will still be present when it will then drop off before your period begins. Now that you know the phases of the menstrual cycle, if you're not already, I would highly suggest tracking your period so that you can really notice specific patterns when it comes to your symptoms, whether that is feeling more anxious before your period begins, getting breakouts or oily skin mid-cycle, or something else entirely. We want to make sure that we're tracking our symptoms more specifically so that we can really start to notice a pattern with when our breakouts are happening, because it's going to give us indications of which hormones are maybe going to be more specific in terms of what we want to work. And there are a few apps that I like in terms of tracking the cycles. MyFlo is probably the best one because it's going to give you specific suggestions that you can take on with your nutrition, your lifestyle, and also your creativity, work life around each phase of your menstrual cycle. You can really start to get a good understanding of which phase you're actually in. But if you are wanting to be more specific and use a method to track your ovulation more specifically, then I would definitely suggest using basal body temperature, because this is also going to give you an indication of your metabolic health depending on the temperature that you actually have. Now, I am going to do a video more specifically on basal body temperature, and I know that there are different contraceptive methods such as natural cycles which predominantly uses temperature. Now, I do want to preface and say that I'm not suggesting that you just use temperature if you are looking to use this as contraception. I like to use temperature as a method of understanding our metabolic health and also our typical cycle, but if you're wanting to use a contraceptive method, I would say temperature alone is not going to be enough. Look into the fertility awareness method and read the book Taking Charge of Your Fertility so that you can feel completely empowered in the different techniques that you would be using to track your cycle and use this as a natural contraceptive method, because you'll be using temperature as well as cervical position, cervical fluid changes, and you can even use ovulation tests to be as specific as possible to understanding when your ovulation is and what's actually happening with your cycle. This is one of the best ways to get a really strong understanding of your hormones and the pattern that they are in currently. And this is going to be really, really helpful as a foundation for your health as a person with female cycles. Now we're going to be talking about the hormone hierarchy, because one thing that I see so often when it comes to noticing that we have breakouts around a cyclical pattern is feeling like the problem is specifically the hormones without realizing that hormonal imbalances actually do have deeper root causes. So I see a lot of advice in terms of acne, and it's common in the literature for people with high testosterone to have acne, but having acne doesn't necessarily mean that you have high testosterone. And for example, if we do assume that we have high testosterone causing our acne and we go in with something like spearmint tea, it's maybe going to help reduce the testosterone, but it's not addressing the underlying root cause of why testosterone might be high in the first place, assuming that it is when it absolutely might not be. One of the big takeaways from this video is going to be that your hormonal acne or hormonal imbalances have a deeper root. And there is a specific pattern and a specific order in which we would address root causes and hormonal imbalances. We wouldn't just go in and address progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone, because what we can end up doing is using different hormone balancing herbs and techniques to try and suppress those hormones. But if we stop taking it, then what's going to happen is they will just then go back to the pattern that they have been in, because we haven't addressed the environment. We've used a natural band-aid solution. And in terms of the order in which we would address hormones, we would always start with the foundational hormones, and this is going to be more specifically the insulin and the cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and when we have chronic stress, This is going to suppress our ovulation, our thyroid, and it's going to also suppress progesterone as well. So obviously whenever we go through stressful periods, our body is going to release specific stress hormones. But if you have acne and you've had acne for a while, it's likely that you are in more of a state of chronic stress, in which case some of these hormones such as your progesterone, thyroid hormones have been suppressed for a longer period of time, in which case you might have more specific and persistent symptoms. So that's something to really be aware of and get checked if you're concerned about that. And then we have insulin, which is related to your blood. And insulin is something that can drive androgen excess and also high testosterone. So if testosterone is something that you're concerned about, we would definitely want to be addressing your insulin, your blood sugar, and understanding how your body is responding to this insulin. And also, if it's not responding well to insulin, why isn't it responding well to insulin? Because yes, blood sugar imbalances is a root cause of acne, but if it's not necessarily just your nutrition driving those imbalances, there can be other drivers of imbalances with insulin or insulin resistance, and why the body isn't necessarily responding as well to insulin. So in terms of those two hormones, the best way to track this is going to be through specific metrics that we can use. So for blood sugar, I like to suggest using a continuous blood glucose monitor, specifically the brand Lingo, because this is going to help you understand what your blood sugar patterns are and be able to track specific things with your nutrition, your sleep, and your stress. And then with cortisol, because cortisol is related with your nervous system, one of the best metrics that we can use is heart rate variability, and getting an understanding of what those readings mean, because heart rate variability is going to be connected with your nervous system. I am going to do a specific video on heart rate variability and continuous glucose monitor tracking as well. If that's already available, I will leave it in the description box below, but if not, feel free to ask any questions and I will try and answer them as best as I can. Once our foundational hormones have been balanced and we are in a good place with our routines to support our cortisol and stress in general, build that stress resilience, and also balancing our blood sugar, then we would look at the precursors and regulators, which are going to be Pregnanalone and DHEA. Pregnanalone is something that converts into cortisol, DHEA, and progesterone. If we have a lot of cortisol and a lot of stress happening in the body, then the body is going to prioritize safety and getting us out of danger first. If we think about how our bodies used to react in dangerous situations when we were running for our lives, let's say from a tiger, then the body is going to release those stress hormones, move all of that blood to our limbs. It's going to shut down our organs that aren't necessary, such as our reproductive hormones and even our digestion. And the priority is going to be to get out of danger. Now, if we're in danger, the body is obviously going to turn that into cortisol. It's definitely not going to be turning it into progesterone. But in a day-to-day basis, we're not necessarily in danger, but our body feels like it's not safe. In which case, we're having this same pattern of the pregnanalone steal, where the pregnanalone is turning into cortisol, stress hormones, and then also which produces more of those androgens, and it is not prioritizing producing progesterone. And we can end up with hormonal breakouts. We can end up with imbalances that feel like estrogen dominance just because we have such low progesterone. It's going to impact our cycle lengths, irregular cycles, our sleep, our energy, and even our fertility. If you're trying to balance progesterone, we need to look at the cortisol first. If you're trying to balance testosterone, we need to look at the insulin first. And then DHEA, like I just said, is an androgen precursor. So DHEA converts into testosterone as well as estrogen. So we've worked on our foundational hormones, and then we have also made sure to support our regulators and precursors. And now we look at the target hormones. And these are thyroid hormones such as T4 and T3. These are metabolism regulators. They control metabolic rate, detoxification, and cellular energy. We then have melatonin, which is your sleep hormone. And this is a circadian rhythm regulator. It synchronizes your ovulation as well as your cortisol rhythms. We have progesterone, which is a reproductive hormone. This is made after ovulation. It needs to be within a well-balanced ratio with estrogen, and it also stabilizes mood. We have estrogen as another reproductive hormone. This regulates your cycle, supports your libido as well as your muscle tone. And then finally, we have testosterone again as another reproductive hormone. This is going to support your libido, and if it's out of balance, this can lead to oily skin as well as. As you can see, when it comes to hormones and hormonal acne, there is very much a specific order in which we start to look at the way our hormones balance. The way that I like to work with clients and how I typically explain this is we always want to start at the bottom first. So there's no point looking to take DIM to balance our estrogen, or take spearmint extract to balance our testosterone, or something else for progesterone if we aren't first addressing our metabolic health with our blood sugar and even mineral balancing to support our insulin response, and we're not supporting our nervous system to really help the body regulate stress a lot better. What you can see from this is we really have to get those foundations in place first. A commonly asked question that I get is around hormone testing. Should we test hormones? Do we do a blood test? Do we do a Dutch test? And the answer to that question is going to depend on what is happening in your body, the budget that you have, and the best time to do a hormone test. I don't necessarily suggest doing a hormone test in the very, very beginning. Yes, there are some hormones which are tested in the blood test that I do for clients. This will test LH, FSH, and estrogen, but that's just because those are typically included in that test already. The test I suggest is a Dutch complete test because it's looking at the adrenal hormones as well as the reproductive hormones, and it uses dried urine. I usually suggest this around month 4 to 5 of the program that I offer, which is my complete program. And the reason for this is exactly what I've said throughout this process. We need to get those foundational steps in place first before we look at the hormones, because if we look at the hormones in the beginning, it really doesn't tell us anything. Maybe it gives you some more answers in terms of what could be driving your symptoms from a hormonal perspective, but that's completely irrelevant if we're not looking underneath the surface at why those hormones are out of balance in the first place. For me, what I always suggest is getting to that root cause first. We would start by addressing which are driving those hormonal imbalances, whether it was metabolic health, your gut health, blood sugar imbalances, stress, various things can be driving hormonal imbalances. So we just want to look into those first. And then around month 4, month 5, if things are still not moving in that direction that we would want them to, then we would do a hormone test and an adrenal hormone test so that we can see exactly what's happening. And sometimes with some people, it's beneficial to have that test because when you can see it on paper, it's a lot clearer to then go ahead and do the steps necessary to make those changes. And to be honest, when I do a hormone test, it typically comes back and says exactly what I would have expected. A lot of the suggestions that I would have already suggested are going to be exactly the same. The only thing that may change is for some people, at this point, we can consider using a specific herb for a specific hormone alongside addressing the root cause of that. So for example, if a client may have low progesterone and they are struggling to really work on those stress components, it's taking longer than they would want. To give that some kind of relief, we can look at a herb called chasteberry or vitex to help support the progesterone if that is needed based on their test results and their lifestyle, alongside those underlying root causes and regulating the nervous system, making sure that the body has what it needs to actually produce the progesterone. But if we were to just use that herb and not address the root cause, that's more of a band-aid approach. It's not necessarily getting to that root cause. So we like to do them both at similar time because we just want to be very, very careful whenever we're using a hormone balancing herb in terms of how the body's going to respond. And we don't want to use a hormone balancing herb without having a specific hormone test, because otherwise we're just guessing, and we need to be very specific in terms of what we are using depending on the hormone imbalance that you may have. And now I'm going to walk you through what I did to really balance my hormones based on the root causes of my acne, and a lot of these things are actionable steps which you can get started with straight away. The first thing was eating enough and balancing my blood sugar. I had a history of being vegan, so what I needed to do was really make sure that I was increasing my protein, increasing my healthy fats, so that my body could actually build healthy hormones. I stopped cutting out larger food groups and really focused on eating enough food and eating in a very balanced way, getting in the nutrients that my body actually needed to really start replenishing what had been lost from years of being vegan and years of being in a chronic stress state. The next thing was eating cruciferous vegetables and just eating a lot more colour in general. I had typically been eating the same foods most days and relying on the same types of foods, and what I was really lacking was this sense of diversity. I also had high estrogens, and cruciferous vegetables are really great for helping your estrogen, for supporting detoxification, specifically the beta-glucuronidase pathway, and helping with making sure that estrogen can get out of the body. The next was nervous system regulation, so I had to do a lot of deep work when it came to nervous system regulation, and what I used for this was emotional freedom technique tapping as well as guided meditation visualization, and I also used memory matrix re-imprinting with a practitioner to really support my nervous system and rewire a lot of the limiting beliefs I had around my body's ability to. I worked on my sleep hygiene, making sure that I was sleeping at the same time every single night, which was, to be honest, I've always been an early sleeper, so going to sleep around 9 p.m, even 8:30 some days. And with my sleep hygiene, actually what I had to do was not wake up at 5 a.m. because for me, I was going to bed early, so I was setting an alarm for 5 a.m, wake up incredibly drained and exhausted because my body was so burnt out. So for me, with my sleep hygiene, what I actually needed to do is make sure that I had a slower morning routine so that I wasn't adding more stress to my body in the morning time. The next thing is replenishing lost minerals and vitamins through the vegan diet that I was on, and also high stress, because whenever we are in a stressed state, the body's going to be letting go of more magnesium, more sodium, more potassium, and more vitamin C. Not only that, but I also had to increase omega-3s calories, protein, zinc, and anything that I wasn't necessarily able to break down and absorb whilst I was on a vegan diet because my gut health wasn't in the best place. I was also missing vitamin D, selenium, B12, and B6. With my lifestyle, the first thing I stopped doing is waking up at 5 a.m. and I moved my workouts to be later on in the evening around 5:30, and I allowed my body to start sleeping in a bit longer. So it feels high is the first thing in the morning, and this is what we would expect it to be. But if you're already quite stressed and you're waking up feeling stressed and then you add in a workout on top of that, you're going to be spiking up even more. So for me, my body was quite drained because I'd been in such a state of stress for so long that actually what I had to do was shift my workouts to be later in the evening so my body had more fuel, but also I wasn't necessarily spiking the cortisol when it didn't need to be spiked, and this really helped with my hormones as well. I also reduced my exercise intensity and shifted to more lower intensity workouts, predominantly focusing on walking 7 to 10,000 per day and strength training in the gym without pushing myself past my cortisol. I also moved my workouts to be more in tune with my cycle, so I wasn't necessarily following specific cycles methods with my workouts, but what I was doing is I was really listening to my body, eating more in the second half of my cycle and reducing the intensity of my exercise to align with my cycle, and I stopped doing exercise on my period other than walking. Now my period pains had completely gone and my cycles were really quite healthy, but what I didn't want to do is add more pressure on my body when it didn't need it. I focused on the recovery side of my period, getting the rest that I needed, getting the additional sleep and the food, and getting in the steps instead of going to the gym. Next is with detoxification. I use specific herbs and nutrients to support each phase of my liver so that my detoxification pathways were healthy and open, and the first thing I had to do with this was provide it with the minerals and the amino acids that it actually needed to function, and then going in with specific herbs which are protective for the liver to really take things to the extra step and also provide my body with additional antioxidants which are necessary when the liver is breaking down toxins. Not only that, but I actually reduced my toxic load in terms of removing fake tan, nail and toxic skincare products so that my body was able to not be under so much pressure. I also removed perfume, air fresheners, and shifted laundry detergent products so that my body wasn't having to process all these extra toxins that it didn't need to on a day-to-day basis. I also went through a very specific gut protocol to help with my hormones because your gut and your hormones are so connected. If you want to learn more about what I did with my gut health, then you can watch this video here which talks all about how I healed my gut. And then the final thing was more specific to my actual cycle in terms of cycles with seed cycling. And this isn't something that's going to be a miracle worker if you don't implement all of the other steps as well. But it's a really good way to support your estrogen in the first half of the cycle and your progesterone in that second half of the cycle. And to really support my hormones more specifically after doing a hormone test, I did use specific herbs. So to balance my progesterone and my estrogen, I used a herb called raspberry, which is also referred to as Vitex. And to support my androgen excess, I did use saw palmetto for a very short period of time at a very specific dose. Now I'm telling you this to be transparent in terms of what I did for my hormone balancing to support my acne, but what I'm not doing is telling you to go out and just use these herbs without working on the foundational steps first and addressing the root causes of your acne. Now what I want to do is I want to go through some homework steps that you can start implementing straight away and start clearing your skin by balancing your hormones. The first thing is, if you're not already, start tracking your cycle. At the very least, using a simple tracking app like the MyFlo app, which is going to help you really get a good understanding of the phases of your cycle. And if you're not already tracking when your period is, this is going to help you keep a log of symptoms, and you're going to be able to start tracking more specifically the length of your cycle and to see if there is that regular pattern there. The next thing is, if you want to be more specific with tracking your cycle and understanding when your ovulation is, then using a basal body thermometer to get to know your body temperatures, your metabolic health, and your cycle. This is something that's quite important if you do have irregular cycles, because it's going to give you an indication of when your ovulation is. Typically it will be your ovulation is being pushed out further than you would expect it to be, but having a more clear reading on what is happening is going to give you a lot more clarity. Now in some cases, like I mentioned earlier, you can use certain apps that use temperature like natural cycles as contraception, but I wouldn't suggest just using this alone. I would never suggest using temperature alone as a method of contraception because it's often not enough. You need to be using something else. If you're using temperature cycle and you want to avoid pregnancy, then you would need to use a barrier method at the same time. Or like I mentioned before, really diving into more specifically learning about the fertility awareness method, so you know how to use cervical position, cervical fluid, and even ovulation strips to help you be more specific with your cycle and your temperatures. The next thing is with your sleep. Make sure that you are sleeping at least 8 hours per night and going to sleep before 11 p.m. and making sure that you are allowing yourself to have this regular regular sleep pattern with consistency. The earlier you go to sleep, the better. If you can aim for 10 p.m, that's going to be best. And if you're not sleeping very well yet, then that would be the priority before you focus on doing anything else. You may need certain support to really help with your sleep, but making sure that your sleep is in a really good place. The next thing is with exercise. Now that you have a good idea of your monthly cycle, what you want to do is reduce the exercise intensity in the second half of your cycle so that your body isn't under additional stress, because cortisol is higher in the second half of your cycle, and the more stress that we add, let's say you have a stressful work life or something stressful with family, what we then don't want to be doing is adding in really high intensity workouts in that second half of the cycle and spiking that even higher. Next, we have your nutrition, focusing on eating 2 different cruciferous vegetables every day, eating complex carbohydrates, protein, fats, and fiber with vegetables with every single meal, and adding sea salt to your meals as well, because your body is probably in need of additional sodium. And then finally, I have a herbal tea recipe for you, which is going to be great for supporting your detoxification as well as your system. This uses 2 parts dandelion root, 1 part dandelion leaf, and 1 part cleavers leaf. If you were doing this in a teapot, you would do a tablespoon of dandelion root, half a tablespoon of dandelion leaf, and half a tablespoon of cleavers. And you can just work this out. Let's say you are using a tea strainer, you would half fill that with dandelion roots, a quarter of that would be leaf, and then a quarter would be cleavers leaf. If you have loved this video, then you're going to love my free training, How to Clear Acne Naturally in 6 months or Less without prescriptions or extreme dietary restrictions. This isn't just a masterclass that you'll sign up for and never watch. It's a complete roadmap for clearing your acne and being able to maintain it, so you're no longer waking up at 1 a.m, 2 a.m, 3 a.m, Googling how you can clear your acne, because it's keeping you awake at night. This training is going to give you all of the answers that you need and very specific step-by-step steps that you can take to start clearing your acne today. If you want to watch this masterclass, then scroll down to the description box and click the first link, where you'll be prompted to your name and email address, and then you will gain instant access to the training. But remember, your hormones won't balance in 24 hours, 2 weeks, or even a month. It's going to take consistency with your habits and your routines. When you prioritize patience, your results will be inevitable. But if you quit because it's not happening fast enough, then it won't happen for you. You don't need to rely on band-aid approaches. Clear skin is entirely possible for you. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.